This is the episode on compression. What are compressors? What do they do? How do you use them? Let's find out. So what is compression? Well, compression is reducing dynamic range. What's dynamic range? Dynamic range is the difference of the loudest part of a signal and the quietest part of a signal over a period of time. If this difference is too much, then compression is the tool that you use to compress the dynamic range so the difference isn't as broad. Let's go over the parameters of a compressor, the different components in a compressor right now. So you might want to think about a compressor as an automated volume knob. The concept being that if you have a signal that has some loud sections and some soft sections, instead of you turning the volume up and down with your fader or with your mouse, you can have this device, a compressor, do that for you. So let's get started in how that occurs. Over here we have the input signal coming into the compressor, and over here we have the output signal leaving the compressor. And you can see that both signals are the same. And you can see this exemplified here with this 45-degree angle. Now, in order to turn down the louder parts, what we do is we lower a thing called the threshold. Now you see at the threshold, you see there's a bend in the line here. If I put the ratio back to 1:1, then it's back to that 45-degree angle. And no matter what I do lowering the threshold here, it doesn't change anything. The signal is still as loud as it was coming in. However, if we change the ratio, we start getting gain reduction. That volume knob, that automatic volume knob, starts to become active. And you can see that yellow line, just imagine that as being a quick move on a fader. And the steeper the ratio is, the further that fader is going to turn down the volume. You get down here with a gentle one, it's doing it maybe 3 dB. You come up here real high, what is it doing? It's doing 9 dB. So that is ratio and threshold right there. Our threshold is here, 1:1, nothing changes. As we increase the ratio, you see more gain reduction. The more that volume gets turned down. Now, here is a thing called knee. You'll see why, because it looks like the knee on your leg. It softens it to where the area of the threshold becomes wider, where it's smoother. So that's what a knee is. Now the other thing to look at here is the envelope. The envelope is attack and release. Now, if we put these up to very slow attacks and release, we see there's no gain reduction occurring. If we come down with a faster attack, we start to see the compressor, that imaginary volume knob, turning down that signal. And as we move it to a faster attack, you can see it starts to turn it down more because it's faster. The second it crosses the threshold, it decides, I'm going to turn that down. If we turn it up where it's slower, it's like a reaction time is a little bit slower. It takes more time for it to react. Conversely, the release is the turning the signal back up. So if we go to a fast attack and a fast release, it's turning it down as fast as it can, and it's turning it back up as fast as it can based on what crosses the threshold. If we turn the release up, watch, it starts turning it up slower. See, it's turning it up slower. Now, if we start attacking it slower, that means it's going to be turning down the signal slower, which means any transients in the signal will get through the compressor more intact. The attack is very important on percussive transient signals like drums. It's attacking it slower and it's releasing it slower. Now it's releasing it slower than it's attacking it. This turns into a sound that's called pumping, and we'll cover that later. So that's attack and release. Attack and release is how fast it turns down the signal and how fast it turns the signal back up. Now this here is called makeup gain. Makeup gain is essentially the output of the compressor. We see that since we've got all this gain reduction, that the output of the compressor is lower than the input, as one would expect because that's what we're doing. the effect of this is it's turning down the loud parts, but the really soft parts, it's not turning those down. But hey, now that the loud parts are turned down, the whole thing seems a little less loud, so you got to turn up the output of the compressor in order to hear those low parts as well as you need to hear them, because the whole thing does sonically sound lower here because you've turned it down. You turn it back up to where it sounds almost as loud as it used to be, but the effect of that is it's bringing up the lower part, the low sounding stuff, the quieter things. So the louder things have been turned down and the quieter things have been turned up. And that's why it's called compression, because it's literally squeezing, it's compressing the signal. So here's an acoustic guitar part, and we've got the compressor that comes with Studio One right here. This acoustic guitar part has a low area, and then it gets more aggressive, and so we have some dynamic range here. Put this together on purpose like this. So let's take a listen to what it sounds like without any compression. Okay, so a pretty big difference in volume there. Now, we don't want to eliminate that dynamic range, but we do want to make it a little less than it is. So I've already tweaked this a little bit. I came up with a ratio of 4:1 and a threshold of 21, and I came up with this attack and this release here. So let's just take a listen to how that works. Without compression, you can hear there's a bigger difference when it goes back down to that low part. Now let's listen to that with the compressor. It's subtle, but it is a little bit less of a difference. Of course, there's 100 different ways to do this, and you can sit here and tweak this for hours. That's the beauty of, and also the problem with doing this, is you can change things till the cows come home. So the idea is to make up your mind pretty quickly. So when is a good time to use compression? What circumstances should you think, oh, I need to use a compressor on this? Well, one of the first ones is if you have a performance, something that's been recorded that has some quiet areas and it has some loud areas, and you find yourself moving the fader around as you're listening to the recording, and you're thinking, geez, I'm having to move this fader, but it's too low here and it's too loud here. Well, that's a good circumstance to use a compressor to take those loud and quiet parts and just do this to them. Bring the loud parts down, bring the quiet parts up, and that way you're not having to move that fader around in order to hear the performance the way you need to hear it. Another good circumstance to use compression is if you have a sound in one of your recordings that you want it to sound more aggressive. You want it to cut through a little better. You can do this not while you record the part, but while you're mixing. I've done it several times with bass guitars or acoustic guitars or vocals. Depending upon what the part is, if something seems to not cut through the mix the way I want it to, then I can run it through a compressor and be pretty aggressive with the ratio and getting that compressor to get a more of an aggressive sound out of that sound. Okay, I hope that clears up compression for you. I hope you understand it a little better now. In the next episode, we're going to get into the basics of editing. Editing is a very powerful thing, and it's something that is a great skill set to know. You can edit individual parts, you can edit sections of tunes, you can edit tunes themselves. Editing is how you help tell your story and help get things refined to where you're hearing the performances you want to hear. I think you'll get a big kick out of it. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and continue watching the Home Studio for Beginners course here on Record, Mix, Repeat. I'm your host, Rusty Smith. Thanks for watching.